Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alumni Conversations. My name is Jéla Lewter, and I'm a first-year student in the School of Professional Studies, getting my master's in publishing. I'm joined today with Kenrya Rankin, who is an award-winning author, journalist, and editorial consultant, and I would just like to let her introduce herself.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk to you today. As you said, I'm an author, journalist, and I do work that is all about lifting up the lived experiences and advocacy of people of color and other folks who are pushed to the margins. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that today.
Yep, and I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me. I think I will learn a lot from this conversation. And so I just wanted to start with what brought you to NYU, what brought you to the School of Professional Studies, and why publishing?
Huh. All really good questions. Well, I started out my career working in magazines. And I had always said that I would work for a couple of years before I went to grad school because I was worried that I would become a super expensive entry level worker. So I was working at Reader's Digest. I got to 2 years and I was like, okay, it's time. And I had an undergraduate degree in journalism, but I knew that one day or I thought that one day I wanted to start and run my own magazine. And so I thought that what I really needed was a foundation in publishing to be able to help me function beyond just an editor and really learn the business side of things. And quite frankly, NYU was the best game in town. There are not, as you know, very many publishing programs at the master's level in the country. And so I felt really lucky to live in a city where there was an excellent one that just required me to go downtown. So, NYU.
And in what ways did NYU challenge you or push you? And did you get taken out of your comfort zone at any time?
Huh, lots. I think the thing that it pushed me to do the most was to really think beyond being an editor. That was the main part of the business I knew. That was what I'd been doing for quite some years, from working at college newspaper at Howard, where I did my undergrad, to, interning and then working at Reader's Digest. I learned how to budget an entire magazine from paper to printing to delivery. I learned how to price out a book. I learned how to manage folks, which was something that I had learned at the student level by doing student government, but learning more skills to put into my toolbox proved really important. There's a siren. And beyond just that, it helped me to develop my own style, right, for working with staffs. And I learned about trends that inform the way that I approach my career. So it pushed me to expand myself in a lot of ways.
I'm definitely experiencing that now in my first
Yeah.
semester because I'm taking a financials class, I'm taking a law class, and it's all these things. Like you said, I mostly knew about editorial, and I think more where my career trajectory wants to go. But I'm learning, and
Yeah.
it's an experience. It's definitely
And
good
it
knowledge.
sticks.
Yeah. So I know that you've mentioned before that you were working full time while you were actually studying. So can you tell me what that experience has been like? Because I'm only part time, and it's still a lot.
Can I say terrible? Is that wrong?
Honestly, as you
Um, no, it wasn't terrible, but it was hard. I lived in Harlem. I would walk across town every day. I would catch the Metro North to Chappaqua very early in the morning. I'd work all day at Reader's Digest. I was a editorial assistant, and then I think I was editorial associate by the time I started at NYU. Do that all day, take the train all the way back to the city, walk across town to get to class or downtown, depending on where my class was that day. Sit there for hours and try to stay awake and stay focused because you hit like 7:30 and it's a struggle. And then I would head home, do whatever homework I had to do, and I would pass out, and then I would get up and do it all over again. So I was tired all the time. And most of my classmates were just going to school. So they were full time in the program, but they weren't working. And it was interesting. It definitely led to interesting conversations, like when folks wanted to get into groups and work until midnight after class. And I'd be like, bruh, like, nah, I have to get up and go to work in the morning.
right.
So it was a different experience, I think, for me than for a lot of them.
Yeah, but you made it through, and I guess, is there anything that you learned from that experience that kind of helped you in the long run?
Um, I guess it just reinforced something that I already knew, which is that hard work gets you through. It can carry you places where you never thought that you would be. Yeah, it was hard and I felt tough because I made it through and I ended up carrying the banner for my program. And so I felt, proud by the time I finished that I had been able to juggle all of those things. And so, when things are hard, it can help to think back on the things that you did that were hard and that you got through. So I think in that way, it was really key.
I agree, and I think that is actually really admirable. And speaking of hard times and jobs, actually, I think a lot of students right now are concerned about starting their careers, especially 2020 has been a roller coaster ride with everything going on, especially in publishing. It's been harder to find jobs and lots of layoffs and things like that.
Mhm.
So I know that when you graduated, it was during a very major recession that the United States was going through. So
Yep.
I was wondering if there was any advice or words of comfort you could bring to the students kind of going through that same thing right now.
Sure. So I graduated in '07. And I landed a new job at Latina Magazine just a couple months before I finished. Like I even had like a graduation slash birthday slash I got a new job party. Um, and then I lost that job at the end of 2008 because the Great Recession was doing its thing. So it was like, surprise. Um, so I know what it's like to graduate at a really tough time. And I think my best advice is something that I actually learned in one of my management classes. I remember we did a case study, or we read a case study, and it was about the train system and how railroad businesses really thought too narrow about what it was that they did. They thought of themselves as being in the railroad business and not being in the transportation business. And so when the world moved on from the railroad as, being the easiest and most cost efficient way of transporting people and goods, the railroad companies that only thought of themselves as railroads ended up shutting down. I think that the way that that translates to us is that, and to you, is to think big. The skills that you're learning in this program will prepare you for their field, but they're also skills that you'll be able to use in a lot of other industries, right? Like when I entered the program, I thought I was going to start my own magazine. And by the time I graduated, I already knew that it was not going to be a magazine, it was going to be a website. Like my capstone completely shifted my concept from magazine to website just in the time that I was there. And then I graduated, and by then I had already like pivoted to working in online publications. And so the idea of what I thought I was going to do, and even the specialization that I chose while I was in the program, completely shifted. But I had picked up skills that I could use in other ways. And I use them now to run my editorial consultancy, to manage freelancers, to produce my podcast, to produce videos for clients. It all draws on pieces of what I learned there. So thinking bigger than what you think you want to do and expanding the universe of what you can do, I think is really my, it might sound kind of pie in the sky, but honestly, it really helped me.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense. And these are very transferable skills that we can use in
Mhm.
any job. So hopefully it'll only just make us more impressive candidates in the future. But
Exactly. And then also, like, don't be scared. Like, I remember everybody always telling us that we should be scared about when we were graduating, but scared money don't make money. Like, you're not going to be able to find a job if you're too scared to go out there and look for it. Just because, things are not great right now, doesn't mean that there's not a place for you in the industry. So try anyway.
I was just like, that. I needed that. So thank you. That's a question I needed answered for myself.
Glad to
But
help.
you can tell me now, let's talk about your career path. How did you get from student with who had just graduated and going through all that and made it to where you are now?
Well, that actually, I guess, starts when I was in undergrad. So I thought I was going to be a PR person. Like that was what I had like got matched with when I did the career survey in middle school. That was my specialization in my journalism program at first. And then I realized I was really bored and not creatively challenged, and that what I really wanted to do was not just have this idea of this magazine I wanted to do somewhere down the line. I think little Kenrya thought that it was something I had to do when I was old. And to shift what I was doing fully into print publishing. And so I remember Time Inc. was on campus. We were having this massive job fair that Howard University had every year for the School of Communications. And I met with somebody there and I told her that I wanted to move into magazines. And she said, well, you got to catch 22. You don't have enough experience for anyone to hire you, and no one's going to hire you to give you that experience. And I remember I worked in student government and I went back to my office and I cried. Like, I was so sad. She really hurt my feelings. But what came out of that, right? Because scared money don't make money, is that I decided that I was going to do whatever I could do to make myself an attractive candidate. So I went and talked to my advisor and all my teachers. My program was like, listen, this is what I want to do. They believed in me. They nominated me for the American Society of Magazine Editors internship, which only one person typically from a university can, be nominated. You have to be nominated by your school. They nominated me because I had been excellent, even though, magazine publishing wasn't my initial specialization. I got into the program. I ended up interning at Reader's Digest. And then I just kind of turned that into, a job, like being really serious. I always encourage folks, like, don't just do an internship, but like be excellent in that internship and then follow up is everything. So like I sent thank you cards to every single person that I met, from the CEO to the folks in the mailroom. I sent New Year's cards to all of those same folks. At the holiday time, I sent graduation announcements to all of those folks in which I said that I wanted to work at their magazine. And on my graduation day, somebody called me and asked me to come in for an interview. And so I ended up moving to New York and working there. I worked in a humor department, which was fun and not at all what I thought I was going to be doing, but exactly what I needed to do. And ended up editing the #1 department for Reader's Digest, which is one of its humor departments, called Laughter the Best Medicine. And my work, because of that, now appears in like 21 different languages. It was a really interesting way to start my career. In between, I started, work coming to NYU. I was in the program, and then I got a job at Latina. There I was a section editor, which is a massive jump for me. I was running the lifestyle coverage at the magazine. That was dope. Got laid off because of the recession in 2008.
Yeah.
And a really funny thing happened. I was looking for jobs everywhere, on all the boards, all of the places. And I realized I wasn't excited about any of them. Like, I was applying kind of begrudgingly, like, I guess I'll apply to this job so that I can eat. But what I realized was that I didn't want to work a job anymore. I didn't want to work for anyone. And so I went into full-time consultancy. I was like, listen, I have unemployment for a year. Let this money be supplemental and work really hard and try to build up a freelance business. And so that's what I did. And by the time the unemployment ran out, I had built up my business enough that I could support myself just on consulting as a freelancer. And that's what I've been doing. I eventually did take a job at an organization called Race Forward, which is a racial justice organization that publishes Color Lines, which is a news site that does news through the lens of racial justice. I worked up from being a consultant to coming on staff to eventually being the senior editorial director running the show there. And then I felt that feeling again where I realized that I didn't want to be working at a job anymore, and I quit. So now I am a full-time editorial consultant. I also, executive produce and co-host a podcast, and I work for lots of different clients, lots of nonprofits doing things like editing op-eds that are helping to advance racial and social justice. I produce videos for nonprofits that are around the same thing, around inclusion, specifically in the digital realm. I write books. I am currently supposedly writing my 6th book. And being able to say, hey, doing work in this way doesn't bring me joy, but I think that doing it in this way will, is really pivotal to me getting to the place where I am right now.
I think the main thing to take out of that is just really that you are a go-getter. Like you feel it, you're gonna do it, and I think that's extremely impressive. And I feel like a lot of us should follow our instincts more in that way as well, especially me. So again, I'm taking notes, like writing thank you announcements and stuff like that. I'm putting that down. That's a good idea.
It's key, yeah.
And you use that go-getter spirit to kind of build your own career. So how is running your own business? Tell us about the hardships, the prideful moments, stuff like
Yeah, it's hard. But as I think we've already established, I'm not really made for somebody being over my shoulder.
that.
I like to structure my own days. I like being able to only take on work that brings me some kind of joy and pays the bills that need to be paid. I think a lot of what I do is managing my time and contracting with folks who I really trust to handle the things that I maybe can do but don't have the time to do, like a publicist and a web designer. Like I know how to do all of that stuff. I'm tired. I only have so many hours in the day. And like just kind of creating systems and things like that. So I mean it's tough, but the freedom of it is amazing. I will say that I think that people oftentimes give the impression that being an entrepreneur means that you only answer to yourself, and that's not true. You need clients in order to make money, and so you answer to your clients. So there's that, but I love that I can structure my days in ways that make the most sense for me, and it's important for my happiness, honestly, my well-being. So yeah.
No, that goes right into the next question perfectly because, like, from writing, podcasting, you have guest appearances that you make. You're a producer and an editor, and all on top of your consulting business. So you are a woman wearing very many hats. How do you have the time? How do you do it all? And you're a mother, I believe, right?
I
So
am. Yeah.
how?
I'm I'm tired. No, I am actually really tired. Um, a lot of it is creating systems that work for me and then tweaking them when I realize that they need change, right? So being flexible. Decision fatigue is a really real thing, and it's a thing that gets to me because so much of running my business is making decisions all day. And sometimes I just don't know. So one thing that I do is I have a little matrix that I made that literally is called like, should I say yes to this? And it I'm serious. It has 7 categories with things like, does this bring me joy? Does this meet my minimum pay threshold? Does it meet my maximum time threshold? um do I like the people who are asking me to do it? Like all of these things that I'm mentally going through when I'm deciding if I'm going to say yes to something, and I use it to assign point values, and if it gets a certain number of points, then I say yes, and if it doesn't, then I say no. And can I tell you, it has made decision making so much easier. If it doesn't get the points, I just don't say yes. The other thing is that I give myself 48 hours before I have to respond to things. So it cuts down on me feeling anxiety, quite honestly, about who do I say yes to, who do I say no to, trying to figure out if things fit into my schedule. Oftentimes, if I let it sit for 48 hours, the answer becomes much clearer. And I also employ something called block scheduling. So, because as you said, I do a whole lot of different things, what can sometimes happen is that I can be doing one thing, have an idea about something else, run to that, get an email about another project. Now I'm doing this thing. Somebody reaches out about doing a podcast. Now I'm trying to listen to the show to see whether or not I want to do it and checking my calendar to see if I can. And block scheduling keeps that from happening. I have a set time of day that I work on things for this client, a set time of day where I do admin, a time of day where I do promo, a time of day where I write on my book, and those things stay contained. And so if email comes in that's about something that is not what's in that block for that time, I set it aside for when I'm able to go into my email and handle it. And it makes me so much more productive. I feel like I've gotten hours back because honestly, I've been super duper stretched trying to do all of those
I bet.
things.
So with your podcast, The Turn On, is that kind of like a guilty pleasure project that you just wanted to do? So you said, I'm gonna do it?
No, not at all, actually. So I love podcasts, and this one, I think sometimes I'll tell y'all what it is. Sometimes people are like, how does this have anything to do with your work? But so my work in all areas really focuses on centering the lived experiences and advocacy and the work of people of color and shifting the narrative around like who deserves liberation and justice and dignity in America, right? So the Turn On is a literary erotica podcast that explores the intricacies of having sex while Black. And to me, and the folks who listen, I hope, it furthers my mission by lifting up the work of Black writers. But more than that, it talks about the ways that all the parts of our lives come together to render us whole. I don't think that you can talk about what it means to be a Black person in this country and leave out the joy that comes with that. I think, folks would love to make that not be a part of the conversation. And it may be hard to understand where we always are able to find it. But even in the midst of living in a world that says that, and very often my life as a Black woman doesn't matter, when I can remember that joy and pleasure are part of who I am and that those things matter to me too, that is important. And that is what this podcast does for me. So every day, every week, every book, every episode, what I'm trying to do is to slide those of us who are often, almost always, pushed to the margins of the story into the center of it where we belong.
I think that's really amazing, and definitely adds a different perspective than what I would have viewed that like as erotic fiction as. So that's really interesting to hear, definitely. And I just want to ask, so you've said like on your website it says that you fill in the blank spaces to shift, complete, and share the narrative around what it means to be Black in the United States. And I would like to know what that looks like in your everyday work, but you've definitely answered how that looks in your podcast. So that's really
Yeah.
awesome.
I mean, I can do this quickly. I think it looks like writing books like Anti-Racism, Powerful Voices and Inspiring Ideas, which is my latest book, and How We Fight White Supremacy, which is the book that I had that came out last year. That seems like 5 years ago. 2020 is long.
Right?
It looks like working with clients who are advancing social and racial justice, and that is producing videos for them, producing the podcast, editing articles, writing. I just wrote a piece for Parents Magazine about little known racial justice heroes that everyone should be teaching their kids about beyond the folks that get trotted out in February every year. It looks like me making sure that that informs the things that I say yes to.
All right, awesome. And so I had one final question about the industry and just being professional in it. So the publishing industry is being viewed through a very critical lens right now. It's been for a while, but especially in 2020 with so much change happening, it's just been known as a place that practices a lot of exclusion from its location to who gets to work there. So I was wondering what your experience has been in this industry and how you see it changing in the future, and in what ways do you think it can improve?
Oh, yeah,
Big
you're
question.
right. Yeah, look, my experience in this industry has been that it is incredibly white, and that there are very often not places for me and people who look like me. And I think there's a whole lot of work that we have to do in order to reach any type of equity, and that the work that is produced in all facets of publishing suffers from having a lack of people of color in high places and being able to make decisions. I mean, I worked on editorial staffs where I was one of only two Black people, period. I worked on with all white book production teams. I've had, places where people of color are at the top of the organizational chart, but they're completely unsupported and not really set up to thrive. So, very often, it's great. We celebrate when, Black folks are now the editor-in-chief at this magazine or are now running this website. But what I know from having been there is that, oftentimes when we are hired, we're not well resourced, we're not empowered, and then we're forced to be treated as representatives of every single Black person who came before us and is going to come after us, as opposed to people who bring our own unique experiences and expertise to the table every time. And I think until we can bring folks in at all levels and truly support them and surround them with the folks and the money that they need to be able to do the things, to be able to, you know, bring on, if you work at a book publishing house, to be able to acquire books from Black authors that, you know, don't tell the same story or don't always portray Black people as enslaved, or, you know, that tell new parts of our story. We got a long way to go.
I 100% agree with that. And I think one of the perks has been this year, because of everything being so remote, there have been more opportunities for people further out who aren't living in New York City, who can't afford to move here for a summer, just to be able to have the opportunity to be in those settings. So that's been amazing. And your writing focuses on racial and social justice as well. So how did you incorporate this advocacy? Sorry, no. How did you come to do this in your work? How did this advocacy become a part of your work? And what literature have you read that helped you on your journey here? Is a fun question I thought might be cool to answer.
So I was raised by a dad who always thought that this was important. So I learned from a really early age, not just the place that the world had assigned me because I'm a Black girl, but also the loveliness of that. And so I started working with organizations like the NAACP when I was in high school. I was working on the youth chapter. I helped reactivate the NAACP chapter when I got to Howard. But what I found is that I always kept my activist self separate from my work self. You know, I worked again in these really white spaces where there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to be able to bring those things together. But when I started working at Color Lines, I was able to really marry the two. And once I saw that that was possible, I ran with it and, you know, started writing books that I hope helped to advance advocacy. And speaking of books, that's part 2 of your question. I read a whole bunch of stuff, but there's a few that I like to recommend to folks. One of them is Angela Davis's Are Prisons Obsolete, which is super important right now as we rethink what justice means in this country. I also like to recommend Charlene Carruthers. She was the national director of BYP 100. She wrote a book called Unapologetic, a Black, queer, and feminist mandate for radical movements. Awesome. And then there's the foundation of Black feminism, which I think is really key in times like this to understand how that framework can be applied to advocacy that advances the needle for all of us. The Combahee River Collective really was, they were like the folks who created the concept of Black feminism. And they have a statement that is famous and that is super foundational. And one of the places I like to tell folks to find it is in a book called All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave. I think it's an amazing resource. I mean, I literally, there's a shelf behind me that you can't see, and it's always really close by because I use it all the time to remember where I came from and how this work needs to be grounded to make sure that we are lifting up the least of those.
And I'm just curious because I've heard of some of those titles. Specifically, I started learning about them in college, though. So I'm wondering, when did you start picking these books up? And obviously, you've been doing this since you were small. Your father raised you this way. But for me, it really was opened up to me as I got a college education. So when did you kind of start self-educating?
That's a really great question. I think it started when I was young because my dad would bring books that quite honestly I was probably too young to be reading them, but I could, so I did. And then it just kind of, you know, grew as I wanted to learn more. So like with Angela Davis's book, I started reading that earlier this year because I had, you know, heard lots of activists talking about using an abolitionist lens when it comes to reforming the carceral system, but I didn't really understand what that looked like. And so, you know, I'm always looking to grow and to learn and to, you know, expand my thinking around ideas. And so I downloaded it as well as The End of Policing by Alex Vitale and started reading because I wanted to know more and be able to help that shape my view. So, yeah.
So in the book you recently published, Anti-Racism, Words of Change, did you take a lot of what you've read and use those quotes to formulate your book? Because it's full of these very different types of writers and thinkers. So Malcolm X, you had Henry David Thoreau in there, and Lizzo even. So I was wondering together this eclectic mix of different people for this book?
Yeah. Um, some of it was things I'd read before, and then some of it was just stuff that I sought out. It was important to me to highlight the words and wisdom of not just folks who have been doing this work in decades past, right? They're the folks who we always hear about, but there's so many more who were working historically and folks who are doing it now. And so I wanted to pick a lot of folks, and I wanted to ultimately, I keep coming back to this, but hold up the wisdom of people of color. Like, they are the predominant folks who are in the book. And my hope is that those folks who read it will either see themselves on the page, or they'll see the person that they want to be and be inspired to find their own ways to be actively anti-racist every day.
Awesome. And finally, just 2020 has been a year of persistent anti-racism action as protesters have gathered in the streets every day since the murder of George Floyd by police officers. And your book has come out in the thick of this large movement. So I was wondering, in what ways is your text contributing to this conversation?
Well, if IG is to be believed, there are lots of folks who are reading it in hopes of getting, I think, a 101. I think that anti-racism, powerful voices, inspiring ideas is kind of like, you want to know more, this is a first step. I think it can bring people in. Again, I hope that it helps people find themselves on the page or who they want to be on the page. But then I hope that folks who read it then move on to action, or read How We Fight White Supremacy, which provides more concrete strategies in the form of stories from other folks. But yeah, my ultimate hope is that it's helping people identify their role in the resistance. I do lots of talks about anti-racism and white supremacy and how folks are dismantling it, and all of that is part and parcel with the books. And I guess there are a lot of folks who have found their way to resistance this year, and I just hope everybody keeps it up.
Me too. It feels different this time around. It truly does.
It does, yeah. I think, between being at home, during the pandemic, if we're doing it right, and especially for, Black folks finding yet other ways or learning other ways that that the government doesn't necessarily care about us when we're in the middle of a pandemic where Black folks are disproportionately dying, and then to see someone killed by police again. I think all those things came together and folks were just like, nah, not again. We're not taking this anymore. And I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's definitely taking back some power in a time where we have every right to feel pretty powerless right now. So I 100% agree with that. And did the timing of everything going on and the release of your book was there any influence on that, especially on future work?
Yeah, so I wrote anti-racism. I remember it was due on December 2nd, 2019. So as you probably know or are learning very soon, usually a book cycle from creation or from submission to release is about 18 months. This book was supposed to come out a little faster than that. It was going to come out December 1st, 2020. But when everything started to happen and the nation really started to erupt, my publisher was like, I think we should get it out sooner. Which capitalism is a thing. So to be clear, part of that decision was because they felt like they could sell more books. But I think that there was also a genuine call to help contribute to the conversation and help people find their way. And then another thing that is really thrilling for me is that a portion of the sale of every copy of the book goes to the Movement for Black Lives Foundation fund, which is really important. That helps to fund like 150 different organizations that are led by Black folks who are fighting for liberation. So worked out really well.
That's awesome. I do have one more question for you, and it is about your new project. I believe that you are doing a new one on the impact of racism on Black women's health. I wanted to know how each project comes about for you, and how does it grow from an interest in research to a full-on project that you're working on?
Great question. So, yes, my next book is called right now Complex Saviors, How Racism Kills Black Women and How We Save Ourselves. And that particular idea came while I was taking a nap on the couch. Um,
Okay.
so I find that I have what I think are really great ideas as I'm waking up and falling asleep. Just the thing, don't know why. Not the first time that I've had a book idea while waking up or falling asleep. And yeah, I was taking a nap and I woke up, and as I was coming back up through the layers of sleep, because I had been trying to figure out, I knew that it was going to have something to do with race and racism because that's what I'm feeling. That is what has been put on me right now. And I knew that I wanted this project to really focus on Black women and all the ways that we show up. And I was just like, oh, this is interesting. And originally I thought it was going to be specifically about maternal mortality. I am a practicing doula, so I help people have babies and help them learn to care for them after. And so that's a cause that is near and dear to me. But then my editor actually encouraged me to think bigger. She was like, yep, that's important. What are the other ways that racism helps to, negatively impact Black women's health? And then I started thinking, and I was like, we can do this. So it follows the life cycle of Black women from gestation all the way through old age and looks at all the ways that, death comes knocking in the form of racism, but also the work of Black hands that are helping to mitigate those things. I think it's really important to not only point out the problem, but to lift up the community-led solutions that other folks can then, apply locally where they are in hopes of us kind of pushing back the effect of racism.
That's
So they
amazing.
just come up is what I
I
need to
mean,
say.
I need to take some better naps. I don't know. I'm not getting my 8 hours or something, but that's your
Yeah, I don't
mind.
know. The one before that, I was in the car listening to a podcast after dropping my daughter off at school. And I was like, that's a book. They just come up.
And you also said that you're a doula, which again, so now you added another thing to your daily activities, and I just
I've had to stop practicing. I don't take on birthing clients anymore because so much of being a doula is being on call because you never know when a baby's going to decide to come. And it was messing with my anxiety. Plus, I have a kid. I missed her birthday once because I was hoping to deliver a baby. And I was like,
oh wow.
yeah. So now I mostly do it on an advisory level. I have a friend right now who's about to deliver. And so we had an hour-long consultation where I just talked her through creating a birth plan and advocating for herself in the room and that kind of thing. So I find other ways to help.
That's awesome. And thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I'm definitely going to apply some of it to my own life. And I hope others can find the same advice and apply it as well. But this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Kenrya.
Oh, thanks for talking to me. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you. And I'm excited for what you're going to learn and what you're going to do.
Absolutely.